Today we have a crazy revenge story of getting back at some awful parents. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, the love I gave wasn't enough. I met this lady, let's call her V, at a grocery store I had patronized for more than 10 years. I had met beautiful ladies in the past, but V's beauty was just incomparable. She's a slender, 5'9" tall blonde beauty with so much finesse that it drips. I knew I'd found a wife, I just didn't know how long it would take to bring her home. Then there's me, a 6'2" tall Native American who has had a fair share of beautiful women. I've always been a confident man who didn't have to do too much to get the attention of a woman. However, despite being a fine man myself, I had a difficult time wooing V. I didn't know what she hoped to achieve, but she gave me a heck of a ride chasing her. I wasn't the type of man who liked to chase any woman, no matter how beautiful, but there was something about V that gave me the sparks. I just knew I wanted to make her my wife. It was strange to me because I hadn't envisioned myself as a married man 10 years ago. I think I was caught in that situation of, when you know, you know. After a period of back and forth with V, she became a little receptive towards me, and that was the beginning of a love story that would test the very core of what I'm made of. First, V is a lawyer, a successful one at that, and she gets to meet quite a number of people from time to time. I got to know early on that I would have to share her with a lot of people, including her clients. I didn't have a problem with that because she was someone who was so passionate about her job, and the last thing I wanted to do was come across as someone who wasn't supportive. We dated for about a year and a half, and eventually I asked her to be my wife and she obliged my request. I was happy that she saw a sense in it. We got married in a blissful ceremony filled with love, friends, laughter, and what seemed like a promise of forever. To be honest, what V and I shared was not just another random love story, it was special and rare. And I was determined to protect what we shared at all costs. You know, I used to pride myself so much on being identified as a ladies' man. When I was in college, I had so many ladies flock around me like bees, and I couldn't pretend that I didn't like the attention as well. So it was easy for me to have my way with quite a number of them, and this is not to say I was proud of my behavior at that point, but I'd always had multiple women then. To top it all off, I never took any of them seriously. But I made a firm decision to be a changed man for me and for my wife V, who was the center and core of my life. I was intentional about keeping our family together, but I couldn't say the same for V. On her end, she had always been a woman who made heads turn, and I mean both males and females found her very appealing. Initially, I enjoyed it when men flashed at her because I knew I'd already had what they couldn't have. I would hold her hand tightly, more like I was trying to make it known that I was her husband. But it was strange that V would give a wide smile to members of the opposite sex, which I found very uncomfortable. But she always had a way of making me feel relaxed while emphasizing her free nature. I knew I could trust her, but I still wanted her to understand that the street is wild and strange. Considering our looks, I wanted her to know that we both needed to be intentional if we were to protect our vows. One time, I noticed that she gave a particular man extra attention. She claimed the man was a client who had a special need. But I didn't see the sense in honoring a man's invitation to a date, which, of course, she claimed were dates intended to discuss their business together. After having a series of arguments regarding her closeness with that man, she finally gave the man some space. By then, I was beginning to struggle with paranoia in our relationship. I didn't know if it was me who was imagining things that weren't real, but I knew there was a way my wife behaved that gave me a weird feeling. To be honest, I hated that feeling of insecurity in our marriage. Before I asked V to be my wife, I'd asked her if she was ready for commitment and love. I gave her ample time to decide if she wanted to go on a forever ride with me, and she gave no reason that she wanted otherwise. I thought every woman wanted to be chased, so I chased her as expected. So it was so heartbreaking to see that V gave the bare minimum in our marriage. One time I decided to stop by my wife's office to drop her some flowers as my usual practice, but she wasn't in the office. Well, it wasn't unusual because there were days she represented herself in court, but when she returned home, I was surprised that she didn't mention the flowers I dropped for her at the office. I guess she didn't go back to the office then. I waited for some hours just to hear her say something about the flowers, but she never did. so I was prompted to ask her if she never got the flowers I dropped at the office. Well, I wasn't surprised when she told me she was at the court for a long time. That was the norm in our home for some time. I would stop by the office, and I would never meet her there. At some point, I was pushed to start watching my wife more because I knew something wasn't right. To make it worse, she was always bent on proving to me that she was not in any way inclined to tell me her whereabouts at every given period of the day. For some strange reasons, I decided to stay in that marriage even though I knew I was gradually losing my wife. When I could no longer allow her to slip through my fingers, I suggested that we see a counselor. What do you expect of a man who is so in love with his wife? Even though I hated that I'd gotten to that point in my life where I had to put in all the effort in a relationship that was one-sided. I hate divorce. Having been raised by a single mom myself, I had vowed never to allow myself to be in that situation. I remember how much I resented my father for a long time because of how much pain my mother and I were faced with his absence. And to make it worse, he got married to his mistress when he finalized his divorce with my mother, meaning there was no chance of reconciliation, at least for that period. V agreed to see a counselor with me, and we started a journey that we felt would take us back to moments that made our marriage to each other worth it. I longed for the good times when V would tell me to pack my bags while she handed me tickets to the world's most exotic places. There were times where she would return home early enough to supervise dinner while she waited for me in steamy clothes to ensure I didn't skip my meal. Then I remembered how she would chastise me if I didn't drop her flowers throughout the week, or if I didn't check on her throughout the day. Our rule was, no matter how busy you are, don't forget to check on your favorite person in the world. In those moments, I was happy I asked her to be my wife, and I couldn't imagine doing life with any other person in the world. Sadly, I didn't know when I stopped being her favorite person in the world, but I would trace it back to when she told me her longtime friend showed up in her office seeking legal redress. That old-time friend was her ex, and that morning, the counselor asked her why she decided to rekindle her relationship with her ex despite being married. She blatantly denied any deep relationship with her ex, but she was kind enough to admit that she honored his request to have dinner with him somewhere around town, of which I almost let out a tear or two when I heard her say having dinner with him wasn't a big deal. The counselor demanded that she cut off all ties with her ex, as she could see that he was one of the major reasons why our marriage was heading for the rocks. Again, my wife blatantly denied having any deep relationship with her ex, whom she claimed had been locked out of her life. Still, she couldn't provide any tangible reason why she had become so detached from me, despite all the efforts I made to preserve the life in our marriage. After we saw the counselor a couple of times, I realized that things didn't get better in our home. The efforts were still one-sided, and I still dropped flowers that weren't acknowledged every other day. I knew then that there was no point in saving what was dead, but something happened that made me realize that I'd been in the marriage alone longer than I thought was imaginable. One night while we slept in the room, even though we slept at separate ends of the bed, I noticed that she got a series of messages instantaneously. That night, her phone wouldn't stop beeping with messages, so I was compelled to check what the messages were about. The first message I read tempted me to read the messages that began her cheating escapades. While I thought her ex was the problem, I was shocked to realize that my wife had been sleeping with her colleague, who happened to be our mutual friend. For some minutes, I stood transfixed and cold on the bed. I was unable to move, nor was I able to think at that moment. I felt a sting of betrayal in my heart, and I knew that I would do anything to make V feel half of the pain I felt. She woke up to realize that I'd read her messages, and there was nothing to hide again. But to my surprise, she became remorseful, and she transformed into the woman I married at the beginning. We continued our sessions with the counselor, and it was all worth it for us, except that I was only living a lie. I had blinked V out of my head, and I was waiting for the best time to strike like a bruised serpent. She was all lovey-dovey around me, and she tried so hard to make up for the lost time. I didn't care if she was pretending or not, but I knew I only cared about giving her a scar that would hurt her just as much. After our counselor was convinced that she had helped restore the love and beauty in our home, she discharged us happily. She was probably feeling fulfilled by saving another marriage. Well, weeks later, I filed for divorce in the midst of what seemed like a redemption for our marriage. I left V on the note of irreconcilable differences, and I can remember her voice when she begged me to just give us one more time. But for me, it was too late. I guess love wasn't enough after all. Honestly, they sound to me like the kind of person who gets burnt out on things, and sadly, even though you get all the way to the point of marriage and committing to somebody and saying those vows, they're more than fine after a while of just ditching it all and trying to move on secretly to the next new, fun thing. Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy crazy stories of revenge, it would be amazing if you left a like or left a review if you're listening to my podcast. That said, our next story is, I abandoned my partner when she needed me the most. I guess there are countless other ways that I could have gotten back at my partner of almost 7 years. However, none was greater or more satisfying than when I just finally decided to up and leave, the very moment she needed me the most, as this was the height of everything that I could have taken from the relationship, or rather, the marriage at the time. My partner, female 30, and I, male 37, were together, or rather had been together for as long as I can remember. She was quite literally my high school sweetheart. She was the first person I had ever fallen in love with, and she was the only person that I truly wanted to spend the rest of my life with. I guess at the beginning of our relationship, this was seeming somewhat like an impossible thing. The entirety of our relationship all started from one fateful meetup with some friends of mine, and this was way back when I was still in high school. I had a group of friends whom I was usually around most of the time, and of every single one of us in that friend group, I was the only one that was without a partner. Not like it seemed like a necessity at the time, but then, it was something that every single member of our friend group tends to make quite a big deal out of. And seeing as back then we were all young and still quite literally inexperienced and somewhat immature, the others always seemed to make fun of me. The thing was, it wasn't like I couldn't get a partner for myself, or rather by myself, but rather, it was that I didn't want one at the time. As unlike my other friends at the time, I was honestly focused on getting the best grades possible and ultimately getting into the college of my dreams. Getting a partner for myself, majorly for show-off at the time, just seemed like a waste of time and an honest distraction. Anyways, I was quite okay with the way things were at the time. However, things couldn't remain that way for long, as their taunts and jokes were already getting unbearable. And then, one very day, my very close friend in the friend group, Alan, informed me that he was going out with his girl and that if I wanted to tag along, I was free to join them. This initially didn't move me, or rather motivate me, as I was still uninterested at the time. But when he made mention of the fact that he was going with his girl, and his girl was coming along with her friend, he thought to invite me, just as a means for me to get to know someone new or meet new people, as the case may be. When I heard this, I don't know what changed, but then I instantly became interested. And also the fact that the date was already covered by my friend and his girl even made the whole idea sound all the more enticing, and so I decided to tag along. I must say, it wasn't as bad as I thought it would be, and when I met this friend of his, who would later turn out to be my future partner, and the one person that would eventually come to disrespect me so much that I was already beginning to feel less than I am, let's call her Bonnie. She was quite the spectacle. She was quite literally everything perfect. She was dark-skinned, she had this accent to her person that just made her all the more attractive than she already was. I just couldn't help but be mesmerized by the way she presented herself. I kept on staring at her that it got to an extent where it was already seeming weird, and this was brought to my notice by none other than my friend, who brought me back to my senses by tugging me and urging me to initiate a conversation instead of just staring, and that it was already becoming quite impolite and rude. In some respect, I was quite okay enough with just basking in her glowing beauty. I finally got enough composure to initiate a conversation, and I must say, she most definitely knew how to hold a proper conversation. Every single one of her words were carefully thought out, and there wasn't the slightest hint of hesitation. We talked for quite a while, and after our conversation, I got to find out quite a lot of things from that, all of which seemed uninteresting compared to the fact that she said she was, or rather had been, single for quite a while. and that she was actually looking to get serious with someone, and also she made it a known fact that she really thought I was attractive myself, and that she was honestly interested in getting to know me. This really blew my mind, as it was quite literally the last thing I expected her to say or even utter. Basically, we got to know each other properly that day, and when the day was coming to an inevitable end, we decided on our own to meet up later, as we'd both enjoyed each other's company very much. We exchanged digits, and it wasn't long before we met each other yet again. The next time we did, we were already quite invested in each other, because we'd already been talking on the phone throughout the entire time before we'd picked a date to meet again. And this went on for quite a while, and it wasn't long before I realized that I truly had feelings for her. And these feelings weren't one that I could have just ignored. Also, to my greatest surprise, the feelings were also mutual, which was the one thing that really got me hooked on what was developing between the both of us. It truly was a great time. It didn't take long, in fact, less than a whole month before we realized our feelings for each other. And then things just went smooth sailing from then on. We were, at that time, practically inseparable. We did everything together. We went almost everywhere together. There was nowhere you would see me without Bonnie. And this was even to the extent where all of our friends were now invested in our relationship, almost to the point of worry, because they had thought that at that time that we were overly invested on each other, and that things might go down the wrong path for the both of us considering how quickly we were moving at the time. But this wasn't an issue on our end, as the feelings we both had for each other were only getting stronger by the passage of time. Fast forward a bit to our final days in high school. Practically every single one of my peers had already submitted their application to the college of their choice, and some others were already getting accepted. Seeing that we both had already submitted our applications to different colleges, it seemed like this was the time when things were finally going to be quite problematic for the both of us, and the only hindrance we were going to have to face in our relationship was the problem of distance. But then again, Bonnie was there to assure me that the way she was feeling towards me was never going to change, and that things were always going to be cool between the both of us. This really made me have hope in the both of us, and in our relationship. And just like that, we had graduated from high school, and most of us were already preparing to head to college in the same month. So were Bonnie and I. We parted ways that evening, as she was to depart very early the next morning, and mine wasn't until the day after. I must admit, life in college was proving quite difficult, and there came some point in my adult life where I was sliding slowly into depression, and even sometimes where I would be overwhelmed with classes and assignments alongside tests and the likes. But the one and only thing that kept me sane at the time was the fact that I had Bonnie in my corner, and she was always there to life me back up whenever I was feeling down. This was the moment when I realized that she was the one for me, and also the only one I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. Right after college, I spared no time in getting my affairs together, and although it was quite troublesome, but then again, I set my sights only on the end goal, which was finally getting married to Bonnie, as this was quite literally the only thing I'd ever wanted. But then I had to get myself sorted out first and foremost. Thankfully, securing a lucrative job was more than possible with the help of family and friends, basically through referrals and the likes. And after a whole year and a half of building myself, I thought to myself that it was finally time to settle down with Bonnie, as to me, at the time, there was no other thing I was waiting for. Fast forward a bit again, I had proposed, and Bonnie made me the happiest man on earth by accepting my proposal. And eventually, we got married about 6 whole months after my proposal. And ever since then, things have really been going great for the both of us. Don't get me wrong, we most definitely have had our ups and downs in our marriage, as even on our wedding night, we both still quarreled about where each of us were going to stay on the bed while we were going to bed, you know? Just the little and most random arguments. But in all of that, we still both very much loved each other. However, all of this soon changed quite a few years into our marriage. And this was basically all due to a misunderstanding. On this fateful night, she was willing to engage in bedroom activities with me, but then again, I had just gotten back from work and I was completely exhausted, and even after I tried explaining this to her, it didn't seem to get through to her, and in the next few weeks, she didn't speak anything of it to me, and this was where I got confused. Was that little talk the reason why my wife of 4 years was not willing to speak to me anymore? This was the only question that was running through my mind at the time, and I just didn't understand what was going on. And then all of a sudden, she was back to the bedroom activities matter again, but this time, she was even all the more aggressive and forceful about it. And then I just gave in, and almost a week later, she informed me of the fact that she was pregnant. It came as a surprising shock, but then it was one of the happiest news I'd ever gotten, and I was truly grateful for the good news. This is where things got really interesting. So when she was 6 months into the pregnancy, I found out, after coincidentally checking her phone, a message from an unknown number popped up, and the details of the message made me realize that she hadn't been faithful in our marriage. I was devastated. I didn't know what to say or do or even the next course of action at that point. I just stared blankly at the text and I dropped her phone and walked away. I was thinking whether or not I should confront her on the true owner of the baby she was carrying and on the text I saw, but then again, I decided to wait until the very moment where it would all be worth it. And this was to say she was supposed to deliver the baby. While she was struggling to get herself together, I excused myself, on the premise that I wanted to get the car ready, but instead I called 911 and informed them of the situation. And they immediately rushed to the house and admitted her to the hospital. After hours on end, waiting for me and countless attempts at calling me, I finally sent a message to her, telling her to call the father of the child she was carrying and to never contact me again, as I cut off all contact with her. This was the last time I heard from her. Till this day, I don't know whether or not she survived the pregnancy, and honestly, I don't care. I mean, I'm willing to bet if they were taken off to the hospital and then at some point they were calling you, I'm willing to bet they probably survived. I'm just wondering how OP's going forward being okay with not ever actually of having gotten a divorce. This next story is how I got back at my abusive parents for how they treated me. Having abusive parents has to be the worst thing that could ever traumatize a child while growing up. And I must say for sure that this was one of the things that truly traumatized me while growing up. I wasn't okay with any of the things that was done to me by my parents, obviously, and I'm sure that no child would ever be okay with them if they were in my shoes, which I don't wish for anybody at all. But then, life is what it is. Sometimes it might be fair to some, and at other times, it might be the complete opposite to others. But I could never complain, because I always held the belief and thought that things were always going to be better for me, and also that things were going to change for the better. This is my story of how I was abused by my parents, simply because I couldn't live up to their expectations just the one time. And also how I was able to break free from the hold they had on me. How I went through a lot to become the man I am today, and how I was ultimately able to get retribution for everything they did to me, and every time they made me feel like I wasn't worth it anymore, and almost on the verge of unaliving myself, quite literally. I, male 26, am the only son of my parents, who spared no efforts in letting me know just how poorly they thought of me, and also how they'd always wanted to get rid of me at every chance and opportunity they had. I'm the third child of 4 children that my mother had from my father. I had one elder sister and one elder brother, both of whom could do nothing but watch as my parents brutally abused me, quite literally every single day of my life. Also, I have a younger sister who was just the newest addition to our family at the time, and also the one I can't even bring myself to blame, and not for any particular reason, but just because of the fact that she was just an infant at the time. And there was quite literally nothing that she could have done to change the situation of things at the time. Anyways, all of my troubles or problems, as the case may be, all started when I was still in high school. Apparently, my parents had made it almost a tradition for all their children to graduate from high school with the best possible grades possible, as this would ultimately increase our chances of qualifying for the best scholarship programs possible and available to us. My eldest brother, who had graduated from college with his degree at the time, had graduated from both high school and college at the time with the best possible grades, and so did my sister too. And then it was all left to me to continue and follow in the same path as my sister and brother had done, making it seem easy apparently. However, one thing my parents failed to take into consideration is the fact that while both my sister and my brother were quite the geniuses themselves, just like my father, I was an entirely different case, as in my own case, the apple fell quite far from the tree. The issue at the time was not that I wasn't interested in getting good enough grades, but the issue was that I just couldn't, no matter how hard I tried. I just couldn't dare to bring myself to tell my father this, as I was honestly too scared at the time to even voice out how I was truly feeling. And so I tried my best to graduate from high school with the best grades possible, in my standard that is. But unfortunately for me, this wasn't even anywhere remotely close to the minimum standard my parents wanted. Not like they even had a minimum standard anyways. But then, this was quite literally the best I could do and come up with at the time. And when I brought my results to my parents, this was when I truly knew the kind of parents I had, and the kind of family I was brought up in. First of all, my father made it his top priority to properly school and educate me on the importance of having good grades, and how I had just ruined my chances of getting into one of the most prestigious schools on scholarship. He also made me know how unintelligent I've proven to be, and also how I'd solidified my spot as the family's greatest disappointment. All of these would have been something that would have gone with the passage of time. However, little did I know that they would have long-lasting effects on my life, and basically how my entire family treated me. The whole maltreatment began from the point where my father made it very clear to me that I wasn't going to ever attend college, as it was ultimately a waste of my time, his time, and most importantly, his valuable resources, seeing as I was unable to do the one thing that would have apparently secured my future. I tried to consult my dear mother to plead with my father on my behalf, but she was just as cold as he was. She even threatened to kick me out of the house if I were to ever come to her with such ideas again. She made it pretty clear that she wasn't up for listening to anything I wanted to say, and straight to my face, she told me that I was forever going to be a failure and a disappointment. All of this just because I wasn't able to live up to the excessively high standard they had set for me. But there was quite literally nothing I could have done, as not even my parents were on my side, so I decided to turn to my siblings for assistance and help. My sister was totally uninterested in my plight, as she completely blocked me from reaching her through any means. But my brother, on the other hand, was the only one that was truly there for me when no one else was. He was quite literally the only one that I could turn to, and for that, I would never forget him till today. So I turned to my brother after the ill treatment I was receiving from both my parents at home were already getting beyond what I wanted. And to my greatest surprise, he honestly understood what I was going through, and even proffered solutions for me, after sitting me down and asking me some worthwhile questions about myself. Questions that I don't think anyone has ever asked me before. And this was as regards to what I wanted to do for myself and for my future, and how it was in line with my strengths. I guess this is what I wanted my parents to have done, instead of making me feel like I was worthless and couldn't achieve anything else in life, if I couldn't live up to their expectations and all. I was quite proficient in drawing and quite literally a professional in the field of art. There was quite literally a whole lot of aspects of art that I was versatile in, all without getting the formal educational knowledge on the subject matter. It was just something that I was naturally gifted with. My brother then promised I made something for him, something I could call one of my best pieces, as this was needed in order for him to promote my work. I was quite hesitant at first, as I was still feeling the effects of the terrible way our parents had been treating me at the time, and I told him that I would think about the whole matter and that I would get back to him in that regard. My mind was soon changed the following week at home. That was when my parents had truly crossed the line between verbal and physical abuse. This was truly when they deemed it fit that verbal abuse and punishments were no longer effective as punishment methods, as it was my own mother that took it upon herself to initiate the physical abuses, and my father followed in suit as he was in total agreement with the idea. I got beaten and maltreated for even the slightest let-up, for they had quite literally turned me into somewhat of a slave in their own home, which was apparently mine too. I got beaten for waking up a minute later than I was supposed to. I got beaten for not doing anything productive around the house, and sometimes I got it just for being by myself. It got so bad that I couldn't just handle everything that was going on in that house, so I decided to voice out my feelings, and honestly, this was the best thing I've ever done till date, as this was the one thing that led to my voice finally getting heard. Although this was when they finally decided to kick me out of their house, as this was, or rather had always been, their plan right from the very beginning. To be honest, I was truly glad to leave their home, as those living conditions at the time were not conditions that any teenager could grow up in. Anyways, right after leaving their home the very next day, I immediately moved in with my brother, who was open to me and offered me a place in his home. I was furious and enraged at my parents, and also confused in some way, as I still couldn't fathom why I was the only one being treated this way. But then again, it wasn't like I could understand where their bad treatments were coming from and all, but still, it was no excuse for the way I was being treated. I decided to channel all the rage and anger I was feeling into my art, and I produced quite a few masterpieces. They truly expressed all the anger and frustration I'd been feeling over time, and it was actually kind of refreshing for me to do this. I eventually gave some of the pieces of art I'd made to my brother, and he took it to an auction, where he opined it was the best place to get recognition for one's work. I was honestly a bit skeptical about the whole idea at first, as I was honestly unsure as to whether or not this was going to work in my favor. But then, it did, and it truly was one of the greatest things and/or feelings I've ever felt before. To my greatest surprise, the first two pieces that he placed for auction got record biddings. That I could most definitely not believe my eyes. And even after I sold the other pieces that I had, the amount realized was more than some people made in 3 years combined. I was in awe of how much talent I had. And it was at this time that I was truly beginning to realize my greatness. I knew right then and there that this was what I was made to do with this talent of mine. And I guess I wasn't the only one who realized this, as there were quite a number of companies and wealthy individuals that were looking to monopolize my talents and artistry for themselves. It became a bid for my talents themselves, and to my greatest surprise, I was able to go from being quite literally a nobody, the reject of my family, to one of the most sought-after artists in the tri-state area. I spent the next few years of my life building myself and amassing quite a fortune, and everything was good and well, until my parents showed up to one of my public meetings seeking forgiveness and trying to get me to accept them back into my life. I was honestly furious, as this was the first time I was seeing them since they kicked me out of their home a few years back. There was nothing I could have thought of on the spot, and I didn't want to have a private conversation with them, so I did to them what they did to me. I denounced them as my parents right then and there, and ordered for security to quite literally throw them out of the building. It riled up quite the scene, but then again, it felt good to finally have been able to get back at them for how they treated me all those years ago. And that was the last I ever saw of my parents. After all the years and the way they treated you, they weren't family and they didn't deserve that second chance. They lost any chance or right of having a relationship with OP the second they laid their hands on him. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy revenge story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.